terrain survival and skill competition. The challenge did not begin with shouting or flags or speeches. It began in silence, high in the mountains where the air thins and every breath feels borrowed. The ground was sharp with stone and cold with old snow, and the wind moved like something alive, whispering across ridges that had watched men struggle for centuries. Long before anyone called it a competition, these mountains had already chosen their side, and they never explained their rules. The Pakistani mountain troops arrived first, moving with the confidence of men raised by altitude and ice. Their boots found balance where others would slip. Their faces were calm, almost unreadable, shaped by years of cold mornings and harder orders. They did not laugh loudly or waste words. Each man carried not just gear but history, stories of patrols above the clouds, of nights spent clinging to rock while the wind tried to tear them away. They had trained their whole lives for places like this, and in their minds, no one else truly belonged here. Then the Filipino scouts arrived and the air changed. They came from a land of heat and jungle, of rivers that breathe and forests that never sleep. They looked out of place to some eyes, their uniforms darker, their movements quieter, their expressions softer but not weaker. Among them was a scout named Miguel, lean and sharp-eyed, his face carrying the calm of someone who had learned to listen before speaking. He had grown up where storms arrive without warning and survival depends on reading signs others miss. He looked at the mountains not with fear, but with respect, like meeting an old, dangerous stranger for the first time. The challenge was simple in words but cruel in reality. Both units would move through the same high-altitude route, crossing ridges, ravines, and frozen passes. They would navigate without GPS, survive with limited supplies, and complete a series of tasks that tested strength, patience, and judgment. There would be no winners declared at the start, only an ending that would speak for itself. Pride sat heavy in the air, unspoken but present, especially among those who believed this terrain already belonged to them. As they began, the mountains showed no mercy. The sun rose weak and pale, offering light but no warmth. The Pakistani troops moved fast, setting a hard pace, their formation tight and efficient. The Filipino scouts followed, not rushing, not falling behind, their eyes constantly scanning the land. Miguel noticed how the wind shifted near certain rock faces, how the snow lay thinner in some shadows. He said little, but when he did, the others listened. This was how they had survived jungles and floods back home, by trusting the quiet voice of experience over loud confidence. Hours passed and the first cracks appeared. A Pakistani soldier slipped on loose shale, catching himself just in time. Another cursed softly as his fingers numbed despite his gloves. These were small things, almost invisible, but the mountain collects small mistakes like debts. The Filipino scouts moved more slowly now, conserving energy, sharing water without being told. One of them, a young scout named Armin, smiled briefly as he adjusted his pack, thinking of his family far away and the promise he had made to come home whole. The first night came down hard and fast. The temperature dropped like a slammed door. Tents were pitched in darkness, hands shaking, breath turning to frost. Somewhere in the distance, wind howled through a narrow pass, sounding almost like a warning. Miguel lay awake, listening, feeling the mountain settle around them. He thought of training in the Philippines, of nights soaked in rain, of hunger that sharpened the mind instead of dulling it. Different lands, same lesson. Nature does not care who you are. Morning brought pain. Muscles screamed, joints stiffened, and the simple act of standing felt like lifting stone. The Pakistani troops pushed forward again, driven by discipline and pride. The Filipino scouts followed, their faces tighter now, the strain visible. The path narrowed, hugging a cliff that dropped into white nothing. One wrong step meant vanishing without sound. Every man felt it, the weight of that emptiness pulling at their balance. Midday the challenge turned personal. One of the Pakistani soldiers collapsed, altitude sickness hitting him hard. His unit reacted instantly, trained and precise, but the mountain did not care about precision. The Filipino scouts stopped without hesitation. Miguel knelt beside the fallen man, checking his breathing, sharing oxygen. For a moment, competition disappeared. There was only a human body struggling against an unforgiving place. The Pakistani commander looked at Miguel, surprised, then nodded once. Pride shifted, not gone but quieter now. They moved on together, slower, more cautious. The route grew steeper, the snow deeper. Food ran low. Conversation stopped. Every step became a choice between pain now or pain later. Armin stumbled, catching himself on a rock, his hand bleeding through his glove. He laughed softly, a short sound carried away by the wind, and kept going. In his mind, he was back home, crossing flooded fields, helping neighbors carry what little they had left. This was just another crossing. The second night was worse. A storm rolled in without warning, wind screaming, snow blinding. Tents shook like they might tear free. Inside, men huddled close, sharing warmth, sharing silence. Someone whispered a prayer in Urdu. Someone else murmured one in Tagalog. Different words, same hope. Miguel felt the thin line between bravery and foolishness stretch tighter. He knew the mountain was testing not their strength, but their willingness to look after each other. When dawn finally broke, it revealed damage. One Pakistani soldier's foot was badly frostbitten. The competition, unspoken until now, reached its breaking point. Continuing would risk his life. The mountain had made its choice. The Pakistani commander ordered a halt, his voice steady but heavy. For him, this was defeat not just of a challenge but of an identity built on mastery of this terrain. Miguel stepped forward. He said they would help carry the injured man down to a safer altitude. It was not an offer but a statement. The Filipino scouts adjusted their loads, sharing the weight without ceremony. The descent was brutal. Every step downhill sent shock through tired legs. The storm returned in waves trying to push them back. More than once, someone slipped and was caught by another's grip. Brotherhood was no longer a word but a physical thing, measured in strained muscles and shared breath. Hours blurred together. Pain became background noise. The injured soldier drifted in and out of consciousness, his face pale, his breathing shallow. Miguel talked to him constantly, telling stories of the sea, of storms that looked endless but always broke. The Pakistani soldier squeezed his hand weakly, understanding not the words but the intention. When they finally reached lower ground, rescue teams moved in. The mountain released them without ceremony, already forgetting their struggle. The challenge was over, though no one had said so aloud. There was no trophy, no announcement. Just men standing in the cold, looking at each other differently than before. Later, as they rested, the Pakistani commander approached Miguel. He did not apologize or explain. He simply said thank you. It was enough. The ending no one expected was not victory or defeat, but something quieter and heavier. The realization that survival does not belong to any one land or uniform. It belongs to those willing to carry another person when the mountain decides to test them beyond pride. Terrain survival and skill competition. The mountain did not end its lesson when they reached lower ground. It only paused, like a patient teacher waiting to see what the students would do next. The air was thicker here, easier to breathe, but the weight inside their chests was heavier than before. The rescued soldier was taken away, wrapped in blankets, his fate uncertain but his life still burning. As the sound of the evacuation faded, silence returned, and in that silence, something fragile began to form between the two units. They were ordered to regroup and continue a modified phase of the challenge, now focused on long-range navigation, endurance marches, and survival tasks in mixed terrain. The competition was no longer about proving dominance in the mountains. It was about seeing what remained when pride had been stripped down to bone. The Filipino scouts and Pakistani troops were paired into mixed teams, a decision that caused tension at first. Old habits die hard, and trust is not given easily in places where mistakes can kill. Miguel was paired with a Pakistani sergeant named Imran, a man with sharp cheekbones and eyes that had seen too many frozen dawns. They spoke little at first, communicating through gestures and short commands. Around them, other pairs formed, some awkward, some quietly curious. The terrain shifted from steep rock to rolling highland, patches of scrub and frozen streams cutting across their path. The first task came without warning. They were given coordinates and limited supplies and told to reach a distant ridge before nightfall, building shelter along the way with only what they could find. No unit support, no external help. Just the land and each other. Imran took the lead at first, his movements precise, his pace aggressive. Miguel followed, watching, learning. After an hour, Miguel pointed out a subtle dip in the land, a place where wind would be weaker and water might collect beneath the frost. Imran hesitated, then nodded. They adjusted their route. As daylight faded, exhaustion crept back in. Muscles that had not yet recovered screamed in protest. Hunger sharpened tempers. One Pakistani soldier snapped at a Filipino scout over a misplaced tool. The words were sharp but brief, swallowed quickly by the cold. Miguel watched the exchange and said nothing. Later, he quietly repositioned the tools so no one would argue again. These small acts mattered more than speeches. They reached the ridge just as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruised colors. Shelter building began immediately. Hands moved stiffly, fingers numb, breath visible. Imran struggled with a knot, his gloves too thick, his patience thinning. Miguel showed him a simpler method, one he had learned tying lines during floods back home. The knot held. Imran looked at it, then at Miguel, something like respect flickering across his face. Night came again, cruel and familiar. They huddled in shelters barely strong enough to keep the wind out. Somewhere nearby, an animal cried, its voice thin and desperate. Armin lay awake, staring at the dark, thinking of his younger sister who used to cling to him during storms. He wondered if she was asleep now, safe, unaware of how close he felt to the edge of himself. Morning brought another test. A simulated casualty scenario. One man from each mixed team was randomly selected to be injured, unable to walk. The others had to improvise evacuation using limited materials while continuing toward the next checkpoint. Fate chose Armin. He lay still, eyes closed, playing his part too well. Miguel felt a flash of fear he hated himself for. Even pretending felt too close to truth. They built a stretcher from branches and torn fabric. The weight was real. The strain immediate. Progress slowed to a crawl. Imran took the front position, bearing the brunt of the load uphill. Sweat froze on his brow. His breathing grew ragged, but he did not stop. Miguel rotated positions often, forcing rests when he saw hands shaking too badly. No one argued. Pride had learned its lesson. As hours passed, the land seemed endless. Every rise revealed another. The sky darkened again, clouds rolling in like a closing fist. The checkpoint was still far. Imran stumbled once, catching himself, teeth clenched. Miguel grabbed his arm, steadying him. For a moment they locked eyes, two men from different worlds bound by the same simple need to keep moving. They reached the checkpoint just as snow began to fall. Armin was declared evacuated. The team collapsed where they stood, laughter bubbling up unexpectedly, half hysterical, half relief. For the first time since the challenge began, someone clapped another on the shoulder without thinking about uniforms or flags. That night, around a small controlled fire, stories emerged. Not loud ones, not heroic speeches. Quiet fragments. Imran spoke of his first winter patrol, of losing a friend to an avalanche that came without sound. Miguel spoke of typhoons that swallowed villages, of pulling strangers from rising water. The similarities surprised them more than the differences. Loss sounded the same in every language. The final phase of the challenge loomed. A long endurance march followed by a decision-making exercise designed to break focus under fatigue. Everyone knew this was where mistakes would come. Bodies were already worn thin. Minds dulled by hunger and cold. The mountain watched, indifferent. They started before dawn. The march was relentless. No dramatic terrain, just endless ground that punished monotony. Feet blistered. Knees swelled. Breathing fell into a painful rhythm. The decision-making exercise came suddenly. Conflicting orders were given, information incomplete. Teams had to choose routes, allocate resources, decide who moved and who rested. Stress spiked. Voices rose. One team made a poor call, pushing too hard, too fast. A Pakistani soldier collapsed, not from altitude this time, but pure exhaustion. Panic threatened to spread. Miguel stepped forward, voice calm but firm, insisting on rest, on rehydration, on adjusting the plan. Imran backed him without hesitation. The decision cost them time but saved the man. When the final point was reached, there was no celebration. Just a long, quiet standing, looking out over land that no longer felt hostile, just honest. The evaluators announced the end of the challenge. No rankings were read aloud. Instead, they spoke of adaptability, restraint, and cooperation under extreme pressure. The ending still waited, heavier than any announcement. As they prepared to leave, news arrived. The soldier evacuated days earlier had survived, but his career in mountain operations was over. The message rippled through the group. Relief tangled with grief. Imran sat down hard, staring at nothing. Miguel sat beside him. They did not speak. They did not need to. Later, as vehicles arrived to take them away, Imran removed a small patch from his uniform and handed it to Miguel. Miguel hesitated, then gave Imran a woven cord he carried, something his mother had given him years ago for protection. No ceremony. Just exchange. As the mountains faded into the distance, the challenge's true ending settled in. It was not about who endured more pain or who knew the land better. It was about what remained when endurance stripped everything else away. Brotherhood not forged by similarity, but by shared suffering and shared choice. The kind that does not announce itself, but stays, long after the mountain has moved on to its next lesson. Terrain survival and skill competition. The journey did not truly end when the vehicles carried them away from the mountains. The challenge followed them in silence, settling into bones and memory, changing how each man saw the other and himself. Days later, they arrived at a joint training base far from the peaks, where the air was warmer but heavy with expectation. The official phase of the competition was over, but a final integration exercise remained, one that no one talked about openly. It was meant to test cohesion after exhaustion, to see if what had formed under pressure could survive normal conditions. The base sat on uneven ground between dry hills and sparse forest. Dust replaced snow, and the sun pressed down hard, unforgiving in a different way. For some, this environment felt closer to home. For others, it was another adjustment, another reminder that comfort is always temporary. The Filipino scouts moved with quiet ease, adapting without comment. The Pakistani troops adjusted their gear, shedding layers they no longer needed, their bodies still aching from cold even under heat. Miguel felt the fatigue deep in his joints now, the kind that lingers after adrenaline fades. At night, he dreamed of slipping on ice, of hands reaching out just in time. He woke with his heart racing, then forced himself to breathe slowly, grounding himself in the present. Around him, others showed signs too. Short tempers, long silences, laughter that came too quickly then vanished. Trauma does not announce itself, it leaks. They were briefed on the final exercise. A simulated humanitarian crisis scenario in rough terrain. Earthquake aftermath. Collapsed structures. Injured civilians. Limited time. Limited supplies. Mixed teams again. The goal was not speed alone, but judgment, empathy, coordination. Some scoffed quietly. After mountains and storms, this felt almost tame. The instructors said nothing. Experience had taught them that exhaustion makes simple things dangerous. Miguel was again paired with Imran, along with Armin and two other soldiers, one Pakistani, one Filipino. They moved into the simulated zone at first light. The area was chaotic by design. Smoke, debris, actors crying out in pain, conflicting information shouted from different directions. The noise hit them harder than expected. After days of wind and silence, this human chaos felt overwhelming. Almost immediately, a choice had to be made. Two injured civilians in opposite directions. Limited manpower. Miguel assessed quickly. One victim was screaming, mobile but panicked. The other was silent, pinned beneath debris. Miguel pointed to the silent one. Imran nodded without question. They split the team, trusting each other's judgment completely now. The rescue was brutal. Lifting concrete slabs with aching backs, fingers slipping on dust instead of ice. Sweat blurred vision. The victim beneath the debris whimpered softly, too weak to cry out. Miguel spoke calmly, his voice steady, telling the person what they were doing, what would happen next. He remembered doing the same during floods, when panic was the real enemy. As they extracted the victim, a sudden sharp sound echoed. A controlled explosion meant to simulate aftershock. Dust filled the air. For a split second, Miguel froze, mind flashing back to avalanches and storms. Then Imran's hand gripped his shoulder, grounding him. They moved again, muscle memory taking over. No words. Just action. Elsewhere, Armin dealt with the panicked victim, calming them, guiding them to safety. His voice was gentle, patient, the same tone he used with children back home. Later, evaluators would note how quickly fear subsided under his care. In the moment, Armin only felt the familiar pull of responsibility, heavier than any pack he had carried. The exercise stretched on. Heat replaced cold as the enemy. Water ran low. Decision fatigue set in. One wrong call nearly caused a simulated casualty when a structure was deemed safe too quickly. Miguel argued for reassessment, his voice firm despite exhaustion. Imran supported him again. They lost points for time but avoided disaster. The instructors noticed. When it ended, the teams were dismissed without immediate feedback. They sat under shade, sharing water, sharing silence. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows that reminded Miguel of mountain ridges. Different land, same light. He realized then that the terrain had never been the true challenge. It was transition. From one extreme to another. From competition to cooperation. From pride to care. That evening, word spread quietly. The soldier whose career had ended due to frostbite had asked for a message to be passed on. It reached them through informal channels, carried by someone who thought it mattered. He wanted them to know he was grateful. Not just for his life, but for the way he had been treated when he was weakest. He said it had changed how he saw strength. The message hit harder than any evaluation score. Imran excused himself, walking away into the fading light. Miguel followed at a distance, not intruding, just present. They stood overlooking the training grounds, watching dust settle. Imran spoke at last, his voice low. He said that in the mountains he had always believed control was everything. That if you trained hard enough, planned well enough, you could master any environment. He paused, swallowing. He said the mountain had taught him otherwise, through another man's hands. Miguel listened, then shared something he rarely said aloud. That every storm he survived back home took something with it. That bravery was often just choosing to move forward while afraid. He said the mountain had reminded him that fear shared becomes lighter. Imran nodded slowly, understanding more in that moment than weeks of training could teach. The final day arrived. A closing assembly. No banners. No speeches meant for cameras. The instructors spoke plainly. They talked about adaptability across cultures, about leadership that listens, about the danger of arrogance in extreme environments. They mentioned the mountain without naming it, as if it were a presence everyone already understood. Certificates were handed out. Hands were shaken. Photos were taken, stiff smiles hiding exhaustion. But the real ending unfolded later, away from official eyes. As they prepared to depart, some for home, some for other assignments, the groups mingled naturally now. Phone numbers exchanged. Promises made without drama. Not all would be kept, but some would. Armin sat on his pack, writing a message to his sister, telling her he was safe, that he had met people who reminded him that kindness survives even in the harshest places. He did not mention how close he had come to breaking. He did not need to. The truth was in his relief. Miguel packed slowly. The woven cord his mother had given him was gone now, but in its place was the patch from Imran, stitched carefully inside his bag. He did not see it as a symbol of alliance or victory. It was a reminder. Of a mountain that did not care who you were, and of people who did. As transport vehicles lined up, engines rumbling, Miguel and Imran met one last time. There was no long farewell. Just a firm handshake that lingered a second longer than necessary. A shared look that carried everything words would cheapen. When Miguel finally boarded his vehicle, he looked back once. The base was already returning to normal, another cycle of training beginning. But he knew something permanent had shifted. The ending no one expected was not written in reports or scores. It lived in quiet choices made under pressure, in lives altered slightly but forever. As the vehicle moved away, dust rising behind it, Miguel closed his eyes briefly. He did not see snow or stone this time. He saw hands reaching out, again and again, refusing to let go. Pakistani mountain troops challenged Filipino scouts. No one expected this ending. Terrain survival and skill competition. Time passed, but it did not dull what had been forged. Weeks later, the memory of the mountain still lived in their bodies, in the way they moved, in the way silence no longer felt empty. Scene 4 began far from the cold peaks and dusty base, in a place where water ruled instead of stone. A coastal training zone, humid and loud with insects, waves crashing endlessly against dark rock. For the Filipino scouts, this land felt closer to home. For the Pakistani troops, it was unfamiliar, heavy, almost suffocating. The challenge returned in a new form, quieter but no less demanding, testing whether the Brotherhood formed in hardship could survive when roles subtly shifted. The joint exercise was framed as a coastal disaster response scenario. A typhoon had struck, infrastructure destroyed, civilians missing. It was fiction built on reality, and for Miguel it cut close. He had lived through storms like this, watched water swallow roads, heard the sound of roofs tearing away in the night. As they arrived, rain fell hard and warm, soaking uniforms within minutes. The ground was mud, thick and clinging, every step pulling at boots. Imran struggled at first. The humidity weighed on him, breath coming harder than it should. The smell of salt and rot was unfamiliar. Miguel noticed and adjusted the pace without comment, signaling breaks near higher ground, pointing out currents in floodwater that looked calm but could drag a man under. This time the roles were reversed. The mountain expert became the learner. Pride flickered, then settled. Imran followed Miguel's lead, trusting the same instincts that had saved lives weeks earlier. They moved through collapsed structures, water up to their knees, sometimes their chests. Screams echoed from somewhere ahead, actors playing victims, but the fear in their voices felt real enough to trigger old responses. Armin moved quickly, guiding civilians toward makeshift shelters, his hands steady despite the chaos. He remembered nights back home when neighbors huddled together under leaking roofs, waiting for the storm to pass. The memory fueled him more than any order could. The scenario escalated. A simulated flash flood warning. They had minutes to evacuate a group stranded on low ground. The rain intensified, turning paths into rivers. One wrong step could mean being swept away. Miguel took point without hesitation, reading the water the way he once read jungle trails. He tested footing with a pole, marked safe paths with quick gestures. Imran stayed close, guarding the rear, watching for anyone who slipped. Then it happened. A loud crack would giving way. One of the Pakistani soldiers, younger than most, lost his footing as a structure collapsed beside him. He fell hard into fast-moving water, disappearing for a second that felt endless. Panic surged. Miguel reacted without thought, diving after him, grabbing fabric, feeling the pull of the current fight back. Imran joined instantly, bracing against debris, anchoring them both. The water roared, angry and blind. They dragged the soldier to safety, coughing, shaken but alive. For a moment no one spoke. Rain hammered down. The soldier began to shake, not from cold but shock. Miguel wrapped him in a blanket, speaking softly, grounding him. Imran watched, something heavy pressing behind his eyes. He remembered the mountain, remembered being the one helped, and felt the circle close. The exercise paused briefly, evaluators observing silently. This was the moment they were watching for, the unscripted reaction when danger felt real. No points were awarded yet. Only notes taken. The teams moved on, slower now, more careful, the weight of what had almost happened settling into their bones. Night fell early under thick clouds. Power was cut as part of the scenario. Darkness swallowed the area, broken only by headlamps and distant lightning. They set up a temporary shelter on higher ground, organizing civilians, rationing food and water. The rain softened to a steady drum, relentless but no longer violent. Exhaustion hit hard. This was not the sharp pain of cold or altitude, but the deep, draining weariness of wet clothes and endless vigilance. Around a small lantern they shared what little warmth they could. Someone began humming softly, a tune unfamiliar to most. It was Armin, barely audible, a song his mother used to sing during storms to calm children. The sound cut through the rain, fragile but steady. No one told him to stop. Even Imran closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound carry him somewhere safer. In the early hours, a final complication was introduced. A missing child, last seen near the flooded edge. Time critical. Risk high. The instructors watched closely as decisions were made. Miguel insisted on going, despite fatigue. Imran insisted on going with him. No one argued. They moved into the dark together, following faint signs, a small shoe caught in debris, a piece of cloth fluttering weakly. They found the child clinging to a tree, terrified, soaked, barely holding on. Miguel reached first, speaking gently, inching closer. The child cried, refusing to let go. The water surged again, threatening to rise. Imran secured a line around his waist, anchoring Miguel, trusting him completely. Miguel lifted the child, feeling how light and fragile they were, how easily the current could take them both. With effort and coordination they made it back. When the child was handed over to medics, something inside the group broke open. Relief spilled out in shaky laughter, and tears quickly wiped away. This was no longer a simulation in their minds. It was a reminder of why they endured all of it. At dawn, the rain finally eased. Gray light revealed mud-streaked faces, red eyes, bodies pushed far past comfort. The instructors ended the exercise. This time they spoke more openly. They said what many already knew. That the teams had functioned not as competitors or even allies, but as one unit shaped by shared experience. That leadership had flowed naturally to those with the right knowledge at the right moment, regardless of origin. The final debrief was quiet. No grand conclusions. Just acknowledgement. The Pakistani soldier who had fallen into the water approached Miguel later, awkward, eyes down. He said thank you. Miguel nodded, understanding the weight behind the words. He did not say it was nothing. Because it was not. Days blurred into nights. The weather worsened. Helicopter support became limited. Decisions grew heavier. At one village they arrived too late. Silence greeted them. The weight of it pressed down harder than altitude ever had. Armin sat quietly beside a collapsed home, head bowed. Miguel placed a hand on his shoulder. They stayed there a moment longer than necessary. Respect mattered. The mission ended not with triumph, but with exhaustion and quiet resolve. Survivors evacuated. Bodies recovered. The mountains remained, scarred but standing. When the teams finally stood down, they gathered one last time at the forward base. Faces drawn. Eyes older. A senior officer addressed them briefly, thanking them for service, for cooperation under extreme conditions. Words felt small compared to what had been lived. Afterward, people began to disperse, preparing for departure. Miguel and Imran stood together again, watching the mountains as they had months before, but now with deeper understanding. Imran spoke softly, saying that some bonds are forged only once and never broken. Miguel nodded. He said the mountain and the storm had both tried and failed. They exchanged nothing this time. No patches. No tokens. Everything that needed to be given already had been. They shook hands, then pulled each other into a brief, wordless embrace, the kind shared by people who had seen each other at the edge and come back. As Miguel boarded his transport, he looked back at the mountains one final time. He felt no challenge, no need to prove anything. Only gratitude. For hardship. For survival. For the people who had stood beside him when the ground itself broke. The vehicle moved away, carrying him back toward warmth, toward home, toward whatever came next. Behind him, the mountains faded into cloud, already preparing their next test for someone else. But this story was finished.